All right, everyone, I have a brand new podcast for you all. Hope everyone's doing well and is enjoying getting back from the holidays. I have a podcast here, and it's a one-on-one interview, which I haven't done in quite some time. I think episode 8 or 9 was the last time I did that, so it's been quite a while. But I had Dr. Dale Ulrich on here, and he's a university professor at U of M and also the creator of the TGMD. And he goes in pretty in-depth about the TGMD, which I'll get into a little bit more in a moment. Before that, I forgot last time that I wanted to highlight an article I read recently from Dr. LeVay and others, which are referenced in the blog, and it's on using tablet technology for PE teachers to monitor goals and objectives for our kids, since so many of us are on the go so often and hard to take that paper data collection at times. So it's a really nice article. Talks about some different ways to use some cloud devices to share and monitor and collaborate. And on the blog I have some videos as well, which kind of highlight how to create your own spreadsheets to keep the data, as well as how to share it and utilize it more in an online way, which is really cool. So please check that out. It's on the blog. And let me get back into Dr. Dale Ulrich in the interview that we have. So I think it was a last episode we talked about assessment, and this is I was going to add it to the end of one of them, but the conversation was so good, it's kind of its own standalone podcast. And we talked about the TGMD 3, the new one that's coming out, some of the new pieces of it. Also talked about kind of the direction of some of the new areas that are going on, and with the TGMD, so he talks a little bit about going more digital in the future, as well as how the TGMD was created and why he thinks it's such a good and effective tool, because it is such a popular tool for PE teachers and other professions as well. A lot of PTs are starting to use it. So with further ado, I want to introduce you all to Dr. Dale Ulrich and get this conversation started. I hope you all enjoy. Now, the TGMD came up a few different times, and one of the things that there seems to be a little bit of discrepancy about is its use in placement. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion or your expert view on how it should be, if it's used for placement, and how it's used to determine placement for a child with disability.
Now, when you say placement, the first thing that comes to my mind is you've already determined their eligibility for services. Now you want to decide you're going to include them in the regular program or special placement. You know what?
Let's start at that eligibility piece. Is TGMD something that we can use for can we use solely TGMD for eligibility?
I think the recommendation is that you should always use a variety of information. Standardized performance and using the national norms is one source. Should it be the only source? Absolutely not. And so you can do general observation. You can use a variety of other sources of information, but I do know that many schools like to have recommendations for eligibility. One major source is how the child performs on norms compared to his or her peers. And so it's very easy to use the TGMD to test the child on 12 or 13 skills, depending on what edition you're using, and then calculate normative scores. And as many states, as long as the child is down at the 7th percentile or 1.5 standard deviations below average for their age, most states would say that they should be eligible. But that's a local school district decision as well.
Yes. And we kind of talked a little bit about that as well during our conference about, some states have a little bit clearer definition of that eligibility criteria than others, or more clear recommendations at least.
Right.
So is there a general area, or do you have a recommendation on when they should be that criteria marker to say that they should be eligible or not?
The eligibility criterion, for example, the 5th percentile, the 7th percentile, the 10th percentile, will totally determine the number of children you're willing to serve. And economically, everybody knows that the economics of education are not good. And so for me to say it should be the 7th percentile, I like the fact that that equates to 1.5 standard deviations below average. I know years ago, the state of New York had 1 standard deviation as their cutoff point. Well, they were serving a lot more children in special education programs, including adapted. Well, they obviously, reality set in, and they end up changing it because they couldn't handle that many cases in special education because of the resources. And so whatever criterion you use, I think 1.5 standard deviations is defensible. I would love it to be the 10th percentile. You know, if a child's performing at the 20th percentile, that means 80% of his or her peers are doing better. That child has deficits. It's just not recognized as severe enough to require extra services and funding of these services. So I've grown to live with the 1.5 standard deviations below average, which is equal to the 7th percentile. So you're willing basically to serve the 7% of the more severe cases.
Very good.
That's totally a local school district decision.
Absolutely. And my experience is that's not always set very, very well.
But I think standardized testing, assuming that you've got a good option or 2 or 3 for standardized testing, is one way to go with one source of information. Should it be the only source? No, I don't think so. I think a lot of other sources. How are they doing in physical education class? Are they active? Just what the motor behavior and fitness looks like in this child could also be included. That's general observations compared to everyone else that is the same age or grade level of this child. I think the more information you use to make that eligibility decision, the better it is. Mm-hmm. But again, everyone knows who's listening to this podcast, we are never, ever given enough time to do a good assessment. We never have been, and we never will be.
I do have a question on this. We'll go back to placement because I really want to hit that. But that time piece, the TGMD is I think that's why it's kind of known as it's efficient and it's pretty quick.
Yes.
Do you believe that's why it's so popular?
Well, I get to talk to many, many people about the TGMD. I get to train lots of people. I listen to their feedback, and I record their feedback for critical information for revising the test when it is appropriate. I think it's quick. I think it's easy, but it does take training. For example, I'm convinced that a well-trained physical education teacher or an adaptive physical education teacher can learn how to use this assessment fairly quickly. But they need to practice because many of those performance criteria on a skill happen almost simultaneously. You've got to be able to recognize when the performance criteria was not displayed correctly. You've got to learn which one occurs earlier in the performance. For example, in the batting, I can score that before the child even swings because how they grip the bat and approach it, I've already scored how they grip the bat correctly. And so sometimes teachers have to learn those things, but the more experience they have, the quicker they become, without a doubt.
Is it them? I know you have a training video as well as the manual. Are those the things that you're saying they need to look at and practice those things, or do they need some type of formal?
Looking for those specific performance criteria.
Okay.
Not all of them are equal in ease of observation. And every time I've revised the test, I've tried to improve the wording to make it a little clearer. But I guarantee there's one or two performance criteria that still have weasel words in them, and I can't get rid of them. I can't come up with a better word. Practice. And one of the things that I'm excited about for the TGMD3, I'm working with a person at University of North Carolina that is very good at developing digital training programs. And we have met on 2 occasions where he is convinced with their software, which is going to be free of charge for this, which is appealing to me, where assuming I will give him multiple video clips of children at the various ages and skill levels performing each of the skills, he will then put it into this software program that teachers or students who are in teacher prep programs can access to train themselves. It will give you feedback. So in other words, they will know what the correct scoring is. And if let's just say we have a junior or senior in college who's in teacher prep, who's learning, who's taking an assessment course, they can log into this program. They can be trained, but they can then go in and score a variety of video clips, and it will tell them their level of accuracy.
Is this in the process of being created?
It's in the process, but it's the early part because I'm still accumulating examples of short video clips of each skill and performance criteria. Have boys and girls at different age levels and so forth.
Wow.
And if you get it wrong, then it will give you another one. If you once eventually you get them right consistently, then it will tell you no longer need training for this performance criteria or this skill. So faculty can use it for training their students. But someone, for example, there's a lot of people now in public health using the TGMD. And boy, they're tough to train. They have no idea how to demonstrate the skills. And so I have to spend most of my training time training them how to demonstrate. Then once they can demonstrate, then we can look at having them score children. And so I've learned a lot by that process. But I'm convinced that we need to have electronic resources that people can access on the computer, on a tablet, on an iPhone, that they can access to train themselves when they have time.
And that's somewhat what the podcast is trying to do in a different way. So that's a multitude of options. That is so interesting. And I might have some questions that when we're all done with this about that. That's really great. And that's a really great way to really train someone. I'm going to circle back now to the placement question because I don't want to take too much of your time, but placement, and that was what really came up with the TGMD during this. And there was the idea that the TGMD can be used for placement, but then there was a strong feeling too that it should not be the defining assessment to use for placement. And so I kind of wanted to get your take on that, your viewpoint, and not for your clarification.
I go back 30 years or more, and why did I develop this assessment system? This was at the start of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, when it was first signed into law, and I was teaching adaptive physical education and recognizing, you know what, we have no idea what we're doing because we haven't been doing it long enough, and there was nothing available for assessment. How do you determine their current level of performance? Okay, I can do that. I can say that the child's functioning currently at the 48th percentile on locomotor skills and the 30th percentile on ball skills or object control skills. That's the current level of performance. I'm thoroughly convinced that a child's current level of performance plus their behavior profile should be used to make an eligibility decision. Now, You can use a variety of assessments. I recommend that if you're given the opportunity or time, do that. But the more people I talk to throughout the United States and Canada, they really seem to be glad that at least there's one test that's standardized, that comes with norms, that is very much aligned to typical curricula in gross motor skills. And so this is just one assessment. Should it be used? If I was teaching, I certainly would be using it, but then I have a conflict of interest, of course. I'm going to use it. But the reason I'm using it is I know what else is out there.
Yes. For placement specifically, do you think it's a strong test, or do you think it's, once again, do you make the recommendation that it needs to be used in conjunction with some other assessments?
I recommend if you have the opportunity to combine it with other things, please do. You should. But if you don't, then I would go with the performance score and the resulting normative score to help you make a decision relative to children at the same age and gender. And I rest my case because I know what's out there. I actually know through research that it's very good at distinguishing between a typically developing child, a child with ADHD, a child with Down syndrome, a child with ASD. And so I'm not sure what else people would be looking for. And it's also very, very sensitive to instruction. If you have 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks of instruction, I guarantee you test the child again, they're going to show improvement. Where some tests are not sensitive to, because some of the things that are on the test are not taught in a physical education program. And so why should they change? Mm-hmm. The skills that I have in here, yes, there's many other gross motor skills that could be put in there, but every time you add more skills, it takes more time.
Your two things, I have two more questions for you, and thank you for answering that about placement. Now you said you mentioned a few different disabilities earlier. That you said ADHD. I believe it's validated with VI, Down syndrome, autism, I believe as well. And so is there other disabilities out there that it's been validated with? And then also, should this be something? So with that question, should I be using this with somebody if it's a very unique disability or one of the disabilities that it has not been validated with? And it could be something unique such as Willie-Prater syndrome maybe, or, which I'm not sure. Maybe you have validated it with that, but,
No, I don't. I'm always, when I train people, tell them this is not a perfect test. There is no such thing as a perfect test. I would not use it, and I never did use it, with very severely impaired children. If you have a child with severe cerebral palsy that also has moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, it does not work with that child. And a lot of the skills are not even going to be useful for that child. But then no other test probably is too useful for them either. I would use a task analysis form for those kinds of children. It is great with typically developing children, mild impairments, and some moderate impairments.
Okay. And what are
disabilities?
Well, could you name some of those moderate disabilities?
Oh, yeah. It's just, when I say moderate, every disability that we talk about can be categorized as mild, moderate, severe. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not talking about a specific disability, but they have mild impairments, meaning they're somewhere in probably the 10th percentile or lower on the test. Moderate would be that they're down near 1% or 0%. It's just been used with lots of different disabilities, I think, because there's not a lot of other things out there to give them options. There's a need to create more assessments for the more severely impaired.
Yes, and that was something that we also kind of talked about, is if you have a kid with multiple disabilities, there really isn't anything.
No, it was not designed for that child. Yeah. I would go to maybe some of the assessments that physical therapists, pediatric PTs use,
Good. So my last question, and you've also kind of mentioned, alluded to this. So, me being at a university, I've had the beta of this for a little while now, is the TGMD 3, which is that officially out yet?
No, it is not. We are just about done with the norms. We had a snag relative to getting an appropriate number of physical impairments.
Okay.
And so we had to offer a call for people to help collect another 40 or 50 children, and that should be done this month.
And what were some of those physical disabilities? Like, do you have people with CP? And
CP, spina bifida, those jump out at me.
Okay. And then, so how is the TGMD3, I'm sure you get this question all the time now, the TGMD3, how is it different now from the 2?
First of all, it's better. Because we made changes based on feedback. We've changed the object control subtest to ball skills. Okay. All the ball skills, and for physical education teachers, this doesn't make a difference. But for other people, PTs, OTs, public health people who are using it, they have no idea when I say object control skills what the heck I'm talking about. They do know when I say ball skills. So I changed it. We dropped the LEAP, and because of a lot of feedback from teachers who teach children with ASD, saying it really has hurt the decisions they've made with kids with ASD since we dropped SKIP. A lot of the children just miss out on eligibility because of that. I never considered that. I never realized that. And so I said, I'm going to put it back in, but I'm going to take one locomotor skill out, and that was a LEAP. I dropped the underhand roll and added the underhand throw.
Okay.
As more of a functional game skill and so forth. And I also added the one-hand sidearm strike, as in, you can picture this as in a forehand tennis stroke with a small plastic racket.
Very nice.
So there now are 7 ball skills and 6 locomotor skills. I've cleaned up some of the words again. I probably have changed a couple of the performance criteria a little bit based on feedback. And based on more research that suggests, Dale, it's really difficult being able to see this one. And so, the more I think about it and I get the more feedback I get on this, yes, you're right. And so I've made some small changes on the performance criteria.
Very nice. One last question just popped up in my head. How long does it take to create a whole, like from the 2 to the 3? How long did that process take of you actually trying to make a new assessment?
Well, one of the things you have to do is you have to make the changes first. Then you've got to go out and do a few studies to make sure that those changes, you still have high reliability, high validity indices, high discriminative ability of the items. There's a variety of research questions that have to be answered. If all of those answers are very positive, then the next step is to collect new norms. You can't collect norms before you answer those first questions, because if you do, and then you find out, boy, these studies are suggesting these changes now have lowered the reliability and validity of the test significantly. Now you got to start all over again.
All right.
So it's basically a 2-year process minimum.
Wow. That's probably a lot to me and all the listeners out there to listen to that. But thank you very, very, very much for being on the show and taking some time out of your busy schedule. And do you have a time or a date when the TGMD3 will be out?
Well, I don't have control of that. The publisher does. And the good thing and the bad thing is the publisher also is renorming the Peabody scales, motor development scales. And the 2 authors on that test are retired. So ProEd has to do all of their work. Well, I, plus some postdocs and doctoral students, tested a lot of children in the Midwest, so they didn't have to do any of that assessment. We did all these preliminary studies for them. And so they want to market the 2 tests together. And so right now I'm telling people it better be available this summer, summer 17.
All right.
And
Well,
I've got to call ProEd Publishing and really start screaming at them, because they will listen. It's just I've been busy on other projects as well. But there will be a number of research papers coming out in June in the Journal of Motor Learning and Development. There's a special section on the TGMD3 on reliability validity from 5 different countries.
very nice. So is it being used in other countries right now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Huh.
And they want to collect their own norms, is what I'm recommending.
Yeah.
You can't use U.S. norms, and so they don't use it for eligibility. They use it for everything else.
Very interesting. So, and thank you so much for being on the show, because the TGMD, and we have, people doing research here at TW, and it seems to, even for research for the practitioners, it seems to be the go-to, the gold standard in assessment in our field. Very, like you said, it is very nice to have an assessment that is a go-to, but we also want to make sure that the people that are using it are, knowledgeable and also thinking about the assessment that they're using.
Yes. But it's kind of like, assessment is the most critical thing we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the heart of everything we do. And so you better have some assessment materials that are valid and reliable to be able to give you the information you need to make those instructional decisions, to evaluate progress, to make an eligibility decision if needed. And, there's room for more assessments to be developed.
So we need some listeners here to make some off of you were an AP teacher and you made one, and
yes.
We need some of them to do the same thing. So, all right. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll be talking very soon. So